down at the bottom. There we go. Hi, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy reporting live from my little cabin in the woods called Murphy's Law. And we are getting ready to start the very beginning of our 4-night Girlfriend Weekend 2021. We thank all of you for signing up and to attend this event. And we're going to be having people going in and out all the time. So just a little housekeeping. If you leave, stop your video in the lower left hand and mute now because I'm getting ready to introduce our author, David Valdes. David, you look great. I'm so happy to see you. I miss you.
I miss you too.
I'm just going to give just a brief.
No, you're not that far away, Kathy.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I've got to get a snapshot of that. That's
one has to have tea with the Queen.
Great. Well, we're going to join David today because he's going to give a workshop called 3 Little Words. Write your story in any genre. So you're going to join him, like we're doing now, for a hands-on workshop to jumpstart your story idea using character, conflict, and motion. The 3 words at the heart of every novel, memoir, creative nonfiction book, play, which he is a playwright, or movie script, and also an author. We'll play with all 3 concepts in writing exercises and leave with the core of a new narrative in mind. This workshop is appropriate for all levels, whether it's your first story or your 40th. So welcome, David. I'm turning the program over to you. So I'm going to mute off and welcome, David. And before you start, tell us where you're reporting in from.
Hello. So as you heard, I'm David Valdes, and I am coming to you live from Arlington, Massachusetts, which is just outside Boston. I teach at Tufts University and at Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, which is the longest title you could have for a school. And I've been living here with my daughter for 15 years. I think that the last time that I got to see Kathy live was 2012, which is so crazy long ago. But I had the good fortune of being at the Girlfriend Weekend with a book of mine called The Rhinestone Sisterhood, which involved a lot of this, in which I followed small town festival queens and their royal duties for a year. So to tell you a little bit about my background and why I lead this workshop. So when I went to grad school for creative, I grew up a poor kid, up in Maine, and it was the thought that someday I would be writing books or publishing books or plays would never have occurred to me then, right? But I fell in love with writing, and I went to grad school for creative writing, which my family thought was a ridiculous idea. Even going to grad school seemed like a crazy idea. When I was in grad school, I kept being told you can only do one thing. So you have to choose. You can be a playwright, or you can be a novelist, or you could be a poet, or you can write creative nonfiction. You can only do one thing. Do that one thing, because if you do more than one thing, you won't do it well, you won't do it seriously. And I really obeyed that rule for a while. And then discovered it was untrue. And so I started my career as a playwright, and I still am a playwright. I've been produced all over the world. That's sort of an exaggeration. I've been produced in 3 continents. The Antarctic, they just don't seem to dig my work for some reason. So I'm a playwright, but then I was writing columns. I got asked to write a column for the Boston Globe, and I was writing columns, and the publisher said, "Would you like to write a book?" And I said, "Sure, of course I'd like to write a book." So I wrote a nonfiction book that was a memoir. When I started doing that, then, I had no joke, people saying to me every now and then things like, "Well, you can't be a very serious writer if," right? On both sides, right? Like, "Well, what are you?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm a writer. I'm a storyteller." And then I went the extra mile and decided I wanted to write young adult fiction. I have a teenager myself. And so I wrote a young adult novel, and I have a new one coming out at the end of this year called Spin Me Right Round from Bloomsbury. And over time, eventually I came around to realize that you write what you want to write. But clearly what I want to write, you notice I don't have a book of poetry. Like I don't have a collection of poetry in there. That's because I like to tell stories. I like narrative. Narrative is completely my jam. But I also discovered a dirty little secret that people don't want you to know, which is that they're all the same thing. I've also written, I have a TV pilot, I've written a couple of screenplays. They're all the same thing. A story always at heart works the same way. And so if you have an idea for a story and you think about three things, character, conflict, and motion, you can write it in any form you want. You can write it as a movie, you can write it as a TV show, you can write it as a book, you can write it as a play, but you have to be thinking about these three things. And what's really funny, people ask me, oh, how do I get started? How do I get started? Because people have this idea for this character. Oh, this would make such a good character. Or they've got this plot thing that they want to work out. Well, the trick is you get started when you can answer all three things, when you can address your character, their conflict, and the motion of the story. I just want to see a show of hands because I'm recognizing some names here. How many of you have already written a book or a play or a story? So pretty much everybody here has done this. So in some ways, what I'm telling you is going to be stuff that you are already doing. So I'm going to try to then just flesh out the links between these three things and maybe give you some different ways, fresh ways of approaching what you're doing. Because you hopefully, if you've already written a story, you're already thinking about these three things. But we're going to play with them. It will be a fun way to keep those juices flowing, and maybe you'll think of a different angle on something you're already working on, or maybe today, whatever you come up with to play with in the exercises, we'll start a new story. All right, so let's talk about each of the components, character, conflict, and motion. When you are thinking about a character, the key thing about your character, the thing that gives you an ability to write a story, is that your character has a want, a need, a fear, or a value. The things that animate your characters are not just that they're Jolene from Norridgewock, Maine, with her cat, right? That is somebody, but what does Jolene want, need, fear, or value? Those aren't all the same things, right? So for you to really start a story, at the beginning of your story, you have to understand what that character wants, what that character needs, or what they're afraid of, or what they value. If I ask a question and you want to answer, just quickly tap on mute and shout out an answer. You can drop it in the chat. I'm sort of bad at both talking and reading the chat, but let's say you have a grandma in Arizona. What might she want, need, fear, or value? Anybody?
Grandchildren.
Okay, so she may want grandchildren, right? So she may not yet be a grandma, right? She's grandma age. All of her friends have grandchildren and she does not. So she wants grandchildren. So that could be what her want is, but maybe you want to focus on a need. What's something that she might need?
She might need her family close by.
Yeah, so she might be like, why did they all live in Michigan? I'm out here in Arizona, I've got better weather, right? So she may need her family nearby. She may be feeling lonely. What she might value. Now here's a case where I think we're already getting a sense of what she values, right? She seems to value family. She wants grandchildren, but perhaps her value is something like she values her independence, right? That could be a value. Her fear, what could be a fear?
Dying alone.
Dying alone. Sure, she could fear dying alone. She loves her place in Arizona. It's fantastic. She goes out for walks every day. There are the saguaro cactuses. She loves the way the sunlight makes her feel. She's got these great neighbors that she can walk to, but she lives alone and she fears dying alone. Any of those things could be a starting point for your character and get the wheels turning in your mind about who that character is, right? So what they want, need, fear, or value. So your starting point is always one of those things or a combination of those things for your character. The other thing that you want to think about with what your character wants, needs, fears, and values is how to make your character round versus flat. So a round character is somebody who's more than they appear at first glance. So if you just say the word granny, media will give you a white-haired lady with little glasses, maybe like the stick pins in her top bun, right? And you've been provided a whole sort of sense of who she is and how she acts and what she must do, right? Well, that's not a very round character. That's a flat character. A flat character is only what can be seen at a glance, only what you already bring toward your association with that character. So you immediately want to be thinking about what makes my character round, what makes them more interesting. Well, Granny may not have a top bun with stick pins in it. Granny may have a whole wig collection and a big purple and green and yellow hat on, right? Granny may be a card shark. Granny may be a mixologist. Maybe Granny's the one who's really good at mixing up the cocktails for the 4 o'clock cocktail hour that all of her friends walk to in Arizona, right? So you want to start thinking about how to make your character more than that type, more than the stock character that you've seen in every movie and in every book, right? How do you make them round and interesting? And one way to do that is to be thinking about those wants, needs, values, and fears. What would be different? What would be fresh? What doesn't usually get covered? And the ways to help flesh out your character is to think about both the external and the internal. So I'm going to drop in chat here. I'm going to drop into chat. Give me just a moment. I'm sorry. There we go. 7 things I'm actually going to drop a set of notes about character right into the chat that you can do what you wish with. And I'm going to give you 7 things to think about that you can consider when coming up with how to make your character round, how to make your character interesting, ways to show your character. So 7 things to consider, and I'm going to walk you through those things. So when you're thinking about your character, like once a character pops into your head, you've got some stuff to work with, but you want to keep going, right? So think about your character as a visual. What do outsiders see when they look at your character? You stand back and look at your character, and what is the thing that they are seeing? What are the things that immediately grab them? What would they notice about your character visually? Excuse me. Your character's body in space. Really good exercise is to think about how your character actually moves around in a space, right? Does your character shuffle? Do they stride? Does your character occupy as little space as possible? Or are they those people that are really right up in your face? So how does your character move through space? Your character's internal life. What's that stream like in their head? Are they a very detail-oriented person? Are they always thinking, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do this? Are they dreamy? Are they a worrier? My grandmother, and she passed this on to me a little bit, was, she used to say she was a widow's walker. She'd always spool out the worst case thing that could happen in any situation, kind of as a way of self-protection. I included this in one of my plays, but it's really true. If I love you, I've pictured you dead, right? If I love you, I've imagined every terrible way you could die because I'm thinking about how am I going to deal with that, right? So what goes on inside your character's mind, right? What's happening in there? Your character's sense of self. And this question has to do with, do they understand how other people see them? How do they see themselves? Do they have high self-esteem, low self-esteem? What do they wrestle with in terms of who they think they are? A lot of my work has to do with identity. I'm a Cuban-American gay man. And a lot of my work has to do with people trying to have this sense of, who am I? How do I fit in? And do I Do I fit what people expect of me or need me to be? So what's their sense of self like? Your character's voice. You've got to work on this. This is something, if you really want your characters to pop, you have to think about how do they specifically talk. Your characters can't all talk alike, right? So you're thinking about things like, does my character speak in lots of long sentences? Are they very terse? Are they very short? I have a friend who always begins a sentence. It feels like they begin every sentence in the middle of the sentence, right? So they would never say, the house is dark. It'd be, house is dark, right? They drop off whatever words they don't need. Is there a lot of slang or a lot of terminology or lingo that your particular character uses? Would your character swear or not swear, right? So thinking about the things that make your character voice distinct are very helpful to you. Two more things, your character in relation to others. So how do other people feel about your character? How does your character feel about the other people most important in their circle or their story or their lives, right? Is your character gregarious and outgoing and friendly, a people gatherer? Does your character resent their family, love their family? Does your character find that their one sibling is a thorn in their side, but their other sibling is a lifeline? Do other people see your character as, oh, the person they would go to in a heartbeat? Or do other people take your character for granted as like not needing people? And the last thing you can do for your characters is to think about their world, right? To picture their world. Really decorate your character's house. Think about not only where they live. Your character does not live in nowhere, USA. Your character lives somewhere, right? Choose a place that your character lives, but then walk around their house. What's on the floor? What's on the walls? What's in the fridge? These are things that may never appear in your story. They might, but they may never appear in your story, but you knowing will make that character real and round. So those are a bunch of things you want to be thinking about as ways to like flesh out your character and keep them real. So we're going to do our first little writing exercise, but before we do, I love to do this with people. If you have the room and comfort and latitude, I'm going to ask you to stand up. If you don't, do this sitting, if you can stretch out your arms. But we're going to do an exercise here, physical exercise that will help you get into right brain. You want to be in right brain when you're writing. So the right and left halves of your brain do different things, right? And the left half of your brain is your analytical, plotting, strategizing, numbering half of your brain. The right half of your brain is the creative, fluid part of your brain that is going to allow you to really get into your characterization. And this is an exercise that is used to help you actually cross hemispheres in your brain, to go from your left brain into your right brain. It crosses, I'm going to get this wrong, the corpus callosum maybe. It crosses over and it gets you into right brain, gets the juices flowing. So what you're going to do, all right, so if you can, stretch out your arms, all right, stretch them out wide. And then choose one arm, choose your dominant arm, and start making a circle with it. Make a wagon wheel. Visualize your arm as the spoke in a wagon wheel. Let it get really comfortable. Let it just feel like it's happening almost without you. Your arm in a wagon wheel. And then when that's feeling good and comfortable, I want you to take the other arm and go the opposite direction. It's tricky. Try to keep it going until your arms are both just falling into place in two different directions. And when it feels pretty good, when it feels pretty comfortable, you're in right brain. All right, shake it out. So we're going to start with character, and I want you to be able to really picture your character. So if you have paper and pen, laptop, however you like to write, we're going to start with some character work. So as a prompt, if you already have a project you're working on or a character you're wanting to be working on, you do that, you work from that character now for all the prompts, and that's great, and do what you need to do. But if you're just wanting this as an exercise, you're wanting this to get started, the prompt that I'm going to give you is, you have a character the day before everything changes. Our starting point is the day before everything changes for your character. So you're going to have a character that you're going to write about that doesn't know anything is about to change. But so this is, you're meeting your character before anything changes. But this character that I want you to write about, I need you to picture, and I need you to really be able to picture them. So before you write a word, I'm just gonna have you close your eyes. So close your eyes, and I want you to stand about 10 feet away from your character and look at your character. Start at the top of their head. What is your character's hair like? What color is it? What texture is it? Is it clean today? Is it usually clean? Is it done and styled nicely? Are they wearing something on their hair? Do they have hair? Go down their face and go to the eyebrows. Are the eyebrows knit together? Are they relaxed? Look in your character's eyes. Think about not just the color, but the shape of their eyes. What expression do you see? Are they happy? Are they nervous? Are they giddy? Are they a little scared? Are they worried? Are they watchful? Are they friendly eyes? Are there wrinkles around them? Are there bags beneath them? Look at their whole face and the expression. Is their face at rest? Is it animated? Are they biting their lip? Are they chewing their cheek? Look at their lips. Are they narrow? Are they broad? Are they dark? Are they light? Is your character smiling? Is your character frowning? Are the lips closed or open? Pulling away a little bit, look at how your character is dressed. What is your character wearing? Do they look comfortable in these clothes? Do their clothes fit? Are the clothes new? The clothes old? What colors immediately do you see? Or do you not see color? Are they very dark or very white or very neutral? How is your character standing? Do they stand with both legs planted firmly? Are their hips slung to one side? Do they shift from foot to foot? Do they seem comfortable? Does something seem like it pains them? Go right down to their feet. What's on their feet? Are they wearing slippers? Are they barefoot? Are they wearing shoes? Are they wearing boots? What do the shoes tell you about your character in this moment? Have your character turn around and face away from you. Have your character walk away from you. How do they move? Are they taking little steps? Are they taking big steps? Do they rock slightly side to side as they walk? Do they have a bounce in their step? Have them stop and turn and face you. Walk up close to your character. Look in your character's eyes. What emotion are you getting off your character today? Are they thrilled? Are they excited? Are they worried? Are they anxious? What is your character feeling today? Open your eyes. All right, so you've got a picture now of your character, and I want you to choose one want, need, fear, or value that your character has on this particular day. The characters, you have just seen them, something they're wanting today, something they're needing today, something they're fearing today, or something they're valuing today. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to free write as your character. So in your character's voice, talks about this feeling, this want, need, fear, or value. Let them just let it all hang out. Let them have a monologue about this want, need, fear, or value. And don't worry about punctuation or spelling or perfect sentences. You want to just let the pen fly and write the whole time. Keep your hand moving until I tell you to stop, even if it makes you a little crazy, and don't worry about it. Just let it all go. What does this character that you just envisioned want, need, fear, or value? All right, I'm going to turn you loose. You have 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning before we're done. All right, go to. One-minute warning. So try to wrap up. All right. Feel free to drop into the chat what your characters want or need or fear or value was. or anything that you came up with to share with the others. I'm an over talker and I want to keep things on schedule. So I'm just going to keep moving along here because I know that we have other amazing things starting. So I don't want to set I don't want to set Girlfriend Weekend off on a getting late course. So I'm just going to keep going here. All right, so we're going to talk about conflict next. But of course, all I want to do is read your wants, needs, and fears. All right, so conflict. The conflict is the engine of any story. People always think that conflict has a negative cast, so the conflict has to be negative. Conflict doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be a bad thing that happens. It often is. But what conflict really means is the thing that complicates or changes your character's want, need, fear, or value. So where we started, where we met them, what makes it more complicated? Is there some obstacle or changed circumstance that accounts for the action of the story to follow? The conflict can be internal. There's something within them, some internal struggle between what they wish and what they value, right? That it can be in them, or it could be external, between them and another person or all of society. One of the things about your characters too is that you can have more than one character, obviously, in a book, right? So your character could be an individual, it could be a family, it could even be a group. And you still have to do all that work to understand all of them. But the conflict is whatever makes it hard for them to either get that initial want met. Conflict could be the thing that ramps up their fears and makes it impossible to handle their fears. The conflict could be what makes it impossible for them to keep their values. But the conflict is that complication. It's the thing that makes it hard to deal with that value, want, fear, or need that we first have established. So the two broad categories of conflict are character versus character. So the character versus self, and character versus society, character versus others, right? Those are the two broad categories. I'm going to drop in the notes here 8 kinds of common conflict that you might use in a story. So just buzzing quickly down through some of these. 8 kinds of conflict. Under the character versus self category, there's value versus desire. So I value my role in my church, but my desire is for the pastor, right? So that's a value versus desire problem, right? Value versus value. I value being a part of a really small community, but I also value my own fierce independence. So that's a value versus value, right? When you're up against your own values. Value versus practice. I value sobriety, but I am addicted, right? So your value versus practice. And expectation versus reality is a big one. And that's sort of like the conflict of life, right? Which is when you imagine, so when Rhinestone Sisterhood was published, I went for a meeting at the Random House building. Crown, the publisher, is part of Random House. And I am in the lobby of the Random House building, and the lobby is glass cases full of books, including books by Toni Morrison, books that I had at home. And I was like, I'm now one of these people. I'm a Random House author. This will change everything. And then the reality was the publicist for the book didn't really get it. She thought it was a joke. She thought Festival Queens were funny. And I didn't the big ascent never happened from this book, right? That's a classic expectation versus reality. You think when you graduate from high school, you're an adult. You think when you graduate from college, you're really an adult. Right? So expectation versus reality, classic conflict. Character versus others, desire versus circumstance, right? So the notion of um, you want to be, has anybody seen Wild Rose, I think it was called? It's about a Scottish girl that wants to be a country singer. Um, she's a great, terrific talent, but her circumstance, she's a single mother who can barely take care of her own kids in Scotland, right? So how is this going to work, right? So desire versus circumstance, desire versus role. You want to be a natural born leader. You want to turn your family around, but you're the third born child, and the two children ahead of you are the ones that the family have already like decided they're the stable ones.
Those new celebrity style frames, huh?
Yeah, there's a hot new brand among stars.
If we could mute Meryl, thank you. Desire versus society. That's a really classic one. I think it pretty much doesn't really, require an explanation. And then value versus value, the character versus others version, which is your value versus larger values, right? So let's say that you are in your family, you are very, very conservative, but your family lives on a commune, on an ashram, right? So your immediate society and the larger society are very different than you, right? So that's value versus value. I give a couple of examples of ways that you can do exercises to play with how this conflict may show up, right? A negotiation. A negotiation is any time you have people, without necessarily saying it, trying to get something they want, using other methods to get what they want, whether it's their physical actions or using objects to try and not to get what they want without anybody talking about it. So that's one way to show a conflict and to show that in your mind. So my example is here, show your character trying to claim a space in a group that does not want them without either party saying so. Delusions of grandeur, have your character narrate a success while the details show something else. And then inside voice, write a monologue of what your character is thinking as they do something they don't want to do. Those are all just some exercises to get conflict flowing. But we'll do a little conflict exercise here. So we started with you picturing your character, and I want you to keep that character. You pictured your character, then we got this monologue from them thinking about the things that they want. Now, instead of having them thinking, I'm going to have you describe. So we'll go third person, have you looking at them. I want you to write the moment they realized things were about to change. So whatever it is that's going to be a change, whatever change of circumstance, whether it's a bit of news, whether it's something that happens to them, the moment they realize that things are going to change for them, I want you to write that moment. Describe what's happening to them, how they look, tell us how they find out, tell us how they see the change, show us that moment. So the first time you were in first person, now you'll be in third person looking at them as this moment hits. I'm going to give you 5 minutes again, and I will put this in the chat. All right, go to. One more minute. So try to wrap up. 1 minute. All right. You can come on back. All right, so we have 2/3 of the troika. We have a character who wanted, valued, or needed, or feared something, and then something came along that changed the trajectory of how they were going to handle that, how they felt about that. And what makes a story is motion, the shift that occurs for our character by the end, right? So what motion is when something has changed for the character or for the reader, or both. Quite often it's both. Typically, most motion in a story is for the character. The character is different than when we met them, whether it is a small way or a profound way. Sometimes a writer will leave a character as they were largely, but with the goal of having changed us, the reader. Anybody ever see 8th Grade, the movie 8th Grade? It's a sort of slice of life film about a teenage girl who's super awkward. And the entire movie is about that period of time for her. And she remains super awkward and not especially newly self-aware by the end. But that was not the director's point. The director's point was to give a window to the reader into how awkward and tough it is to be that age, right? So that can be a motion also to change how the reader views things. But probably 80–90% of the time, the goal is to change the character. So something shifts for the character. So I'll put this in the notes as well. Let me drop this into the chat. So here are some common kinds of motion. The character's behavior or attitude is changed in a meaningful way. That's the most common thing, right? The character that was kind of closed down at the beginning becomes more open. You've seen a million movies in which a grumpy person in their 60s or 70s has a child thrust upon them and then suddenly becomes nicer and more open, right? So something about the character's behavior or attitude changes. That's the most common thing. The character does or does not reach a goal, but discovers the goal was not the most important thing. So quite often, the story arc is not about does the character get what they wanted? Does the character put an end to their fears? But an understanding on the other end that what they were focused on in the first place was wrong. Right? They don't need to worry about that fear. They don't have to care about whether they make it as a country singer, right? Whatever it is. So that's a second really common kind of motion. The third one is the character's circumstances are changed, which helps them learn something new. So they get the thing they want. They become the Duke of Edinburgh, whatever it is, right? But there's a takeaway from it that's really the important part. The having a change in circumstance teaches them. And the last one is the reader sees everything differently because of the character's experiences, right? So that the real motion there is clearly intended for us to have that experience. The thing that's really important, if you're writing a story, if you're writing a narrative that really makes sense and a narrative that is meaningful, that motion needs to naturally grow out of the action and the character that we started with. Having the motion, and then at the end, everybody dies, but you haven't actually set up that anything is deadly or threatening is a problem, right? If the motion is, and then I woke up, right? The alarm clock going off that every sixth grader writes in a story at least once. That doesn't grow naturally from wants, desires, fears, values, or from conflict. That's just a solve for you. So you want to be thinking, how does my ending grow from these things? How does it organically show the thought process that I have put into it of this yielded this, which means this. I gave you a couple of different kinds of exercises you could do for motion. And we're actually going to use one of these as our motion exercise for today. So what we're going to do for today is the have you seen her lately? And if your character is a he or a they, that's fine. But the have you seen her lately exercise is when somebody from outside, so we did a monologue from the person's point of view, then we did an omniscient third person. Now we're going to do third person, but from the eyes of somebody, a specific person who is seeing your character, let's say a year, and you can decide a year, 5 years, 10 years after the events in your second exercise. So somebody's seeing your character now on the other side of that conflict and is looking at them and is talking to a third person and is saying, have you seen blank lately? And is describing what they see, right? Maybe it's great, maybe it's not great, maybe they're jealous, maybe they're sympathetic, but they're going to paint a portrait of what that change has looked like for your character. Have you seen her lately? I'm going to give you 5 minutes for this as well. All right, so go to, and I'll put this in the chat. All right, 1 minute. All right, and if you can come back, all right, if you can come back, that would be great. So we've just gone through really quickly the 3 building blocks of every single kind of narrative. A character who wants, needs, values, or fears something, the obstacle that complicates it and gets in the way and sets them on a new journey, and the change that has occurred by the time that journey is done. And by the time that journey is done is where this story ends. Many more stories can ensue and unfold, right? When it comes to starting a new project, you can start a project with 2 of those things, the character and the conflict. You may well not know or want to know what the motion will be, but you're not done your story until you do know. Another piece of advice I always give my students is if they're wanting to strategize, they could come up with 3 possible ends for their story. They could come up with 3 directions a story could take. And then once they have, they should immediately discount the most likely one because somebody's already written that story, right? They should resist writing that story, but keep going from there. I'm going to drop in here just like the key, sort of a key takeaway that you should be asking. And I use book here, but, or do I say book? Maybe I don't. For your story, the key questions to ask yourself. How does my ending speak to my beginning? How does the middle complicate the former and earn the latter? How has my character changed and how might the reader have changed as well? So those are just some real sort of like brief takeaways. If you have those 3 things in mind, you can come up with the germ of a story. And of course, every genre has its own things. You then start working on all the plotting. You can do that same thing for your B plot and your B characters if you have multiple characters worked in. But those things will sustain you when, especially when you're in the midst of a project and you're like, oh, what is this mess? What have I done? This, by the way, I want to be clear, this applies to all things that are narration, including memoir. So if you are writing memoir in creative nonfiction, this applies to you. The reader needs to be able to see what you want, need, fear, or value, the things that you face, and how you are changed by the end of the story, because that's how you know what a story is. I interviewed Chaim Potok a few years ago. When I say a few years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago now. I was still like a college student. So we'll say 10 years ago. But I interviewed him. He had written The Chosen and The Promise. My name is Asher Lev. And he said in an interview, that all a story is, he said, every story is the same thing. It's when a human encounters someone or something that is not themselves and comes out on the other side slightly different. And he's absolutely right. It is 2:56, so I'm going to hand off to Kathy. And thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate you being here. I hope that you have lots of excellent writing ahead. Kathy.
I just want to thank you so much, David. I mean, when you came to me and asked if you could do this, I immediately said yes. And it's really helping me on something that I'm working on. I hope is helping all of you. I want you to briefly tell everybody how they can get in contact with you, and then we're going to have to go on to our next meeting. So what's the best way to get in touch with you, David?
So I will give you my email here, mambobean@gmail.com. And my website is davidvaldeswrites.com. And if you want to read some current work, you can follow me on Medium at mambobean@medium.com, including my new advice column for young people, Your Other Dad Says.
Fantastic. And you know what? I'll collect all these and we'll share them later. But as we leave, thank you so much, David. I want to see that 2022 book from Bloomsbury. You
Oh, you
know,
will get it. You
I
will get it. Don't you
I
worry.
love you and I love everything that you're doing. Thank you so much. So we really appreciate your generosity in doing this workshop. Now we're going to leave this Zoom, but before you do, we're going to join another one that's going to have a lot of authors. So we're still working out how all this is going to work. It starts at 2 o'clock. Your screen, you will go off for a minute and you'll go to the next link to connect. So please understand that there may be, the screen may go black, but go to the next Zoom link and I will meet you there. Anything else anybody want to quickly say? Be quick. All right, here we go on to the next meeting. Thank you, David. Keep with us.
Bye.
Bye.